If you're a boxing fan, you're definitely going to want to purchase Hall of Fame broadcaster Al Bernstein's new book, 30 Years, 30 Undeniable Truths About Boxing, Sports, and TV. It's a must-read for fight fans.
Al, great to see you again.
Good to be with you, Smitty.
Let's talk about the new book. Tell us about it.
Well, it's called 30 Years, 30 Undeniable Truths About Boxing, Sports, and TV. And it's kind of a compilation of a lot of the experiences I've had and the events I've covered and some of the interesting and fun people I've met. And I hope it's a kind of a humorous, fun telling of those events.
I love the title. Where did you get the idea for this title?
I'll tell you, to be honest, I couldn't really, when they wanted me to write this book, I said I couldn't really figure out how to write it in a lineal form, like some kind of like start at point A, get to point Z, I just couldn't figure out how to do that. So I thought I needed something that would allow me to make every chapter feel like something different, where I could just time travel back and forth and put them together in a loosely formed configuration and have them be the fabric of what's going on. So I said, what is one thing that I can do? And I thought of this undeniable truth, where I could come up with some ironic undeniable truth where I could tie in a bunch of things. Like for instance, one of the undeniable truths is that beware of anyone who calls you Mister. And I came up with this one based upon Mike Tyson, because right at the beginning of his career, when I did his fights on ESPN, he was, of course, a young heavyweight. And as you remember from those years, he was very respectful. And you'd bump into him and he'd say, "Oh, hi, Mr. Bernstein," and he'd tell you about boxing history. And then, flash forward about 10 years to 1995, after he'd come out of prison for convicted of rape. And he was fighting Peter McNeely, and he wasn't too happy with ESPN about their coverage of the trial and all the rest of it. Though I wasn't a big part of that coverage, I was the face of boxing at ESPN, so some of the venom was, I guess, attached to me. But they managed to convince Tyson to do an interview with us on live TV at the weigh-in of the McNeely fight, and so I was there, and he got off the scales, and instead of coming right over to me, he kind of wandered over to where he sat down and slowly putting his shirt on, slowly putting his pants on, lacing up his shoes, not what we'd planned. So finally, I'm filling time on live TV, and as you well know, that seconds feel like minutes, minutes feel like hours. And so finally I said, well, I've got to take a shot at this. So I get over there and I put the microphone there and I say, let's see if we can hear from the former champ. Mike, can we get a word with you? And he looked up at me with this devilish grin and said, "No effing way." I said, "I'll take that as a no. Back to you, Charlie Steiner." And I end the chapter by saying, apparently we'd come a long way from Mr. Bernstein. So don't trust anybody that calls you Mr.
An undeniable ending to that
Yes.
to that interview. It's funny though. When I sat down and did an entire show with Mike, he said something that made a lot of sense to me. Though he said that this business is so addictive, and even I think for guys like. I think boxing broadcasters, and you've covered other sports, and I've covered other sports, but what does it take to be a boxing commentator?
Well,
other than a little bit of insanity.
Yeah, well, that's necessary. I'd like to think that at the end of the day, it should take exactly the same things it takes to be a commentator elsewhere. And I know people see boxing differently, and they filter it through this idea that, oh, it's a kind of nutty, crazy kind of sport, and it is that. It's totally entrepreneurial, and the way the sport is configured in terms of the way the participants have to fight it, there's a never-ending amount of crazy things that can happen. More so, it seems, than in other sports. But at the end of the day, I think for us, for broadcasters, we're doing the same thing any good broadcaster would do in any other sport, and the same thing we do on other sports. I mean, or you should anyway. You should be informational to people. You should be telling them what's important. You should be enlightening them. And, so I think, and that's why the really good sportscasters, that, especially the ones that do play-by-play or hosting, that have come on to do boxing with me from other sports, some of them are not boxing experts, but some have done an excellent job.
I think it was the great Jimmy Cannon who called this the red light district of sports.
Yeah, it's true.
And you're right. To do the job effectively, you have to treat it like another sport,
Right.
break it down, tell the story. But we certainly come across different characters in this
Oh,
sport
yeah.
than in any other sport. I can imagine in the book you must have stories about a lot of those characters.
Oh my God, yeah. No, it's true. Well, here's one. Kenny Bang Bang Bogner. Again, it's going to sound like the whole book is about people swearing, but it's actually not, believe it or not. But Kenny Bogner, who was the lightweight fighter years ago, was on ESPN in the early '80s, and he had this rabid following that in Atlantic City that would follow him, and he won this fight against Cato Wilson. It was the ESPN Fight of the Year, and I'm interviewing afterwards on ESPN, and the fans are still all around there chanting and cheering, and he's got this hood over his head, and so the noise is really loud. And I asked him some question about how he won the fight, and he looks at me and he said, "Al, I didn't hear an effing word you said." And then I repeated the question much louder. And he said, "Oh, now I heard you. Before, I didn't hear an effing word you said." So it's like you don't really, although you do encounter that sometimes in other sports, you don't always encounter it. And so there is a colorful, and then I talk in the book about some of the crazy things that have happened in between rounds with trainers and whatever, which is pretty nutty. But yeah, there are a lot of characters in boxing, and that's the part that makes it fun, I think, and makes it interesting.
And I know you get a lot of this. I have people coming up to me all the time, youngsters that want to become a boxing commentator, a boxing broadcaster. And what in this book would perhaps help them in that area?
Well, I hope that the part that they would take away, I do have a chapter in there, actually, and I don't know if this helps them or doesn't help them, because the undeniable truth is advice can be both right and wrong at the same time. And I took it because Don Dunphy, the great boxing broadcaster of of 4 decades, who I got to meet in 1986 when I interviewed him on ESPN's boxing show, became kind of a mentor and a friend to me after that. And he was my idol growing up as a child. When I was a 10-year-old, I would sneak down and try and listen to the TV when I was supposed to be up, and I heard his voice. So he's an amazing guy. And he said, the one piece of advice I would give you is, once you're doing a boxing match, once that event starts, it's not about you. And at the end of the day, of course, what he's saying is don't hijack an event. Of course, you want to show your personality. You don't want people to forget who you are. But at the end of the day, you don't want to hijack that event. You don't want to make yourself bigger than the event. And I thought that was great advice. And I said the advice is right, but in today's world of sportscasting, if you gave that as advice to a young person, I'm not sure it would be right. Because at the end of the day, I think the majority of sportscasters today think it's always about them.
One of the other things I think that causes this sport to be so addictive is the athletes involved. I always say fighters are the most common and uncommon of all athletes I've come across. Your thoughts on fighters?
That's a good way to put it. Most common and uncommon, and that's a great phrase, because they're common in that they are. When you interview fighters, and you and I have interviewed thousands, they're really regular guys, aren't they? Most of them. The big superstars, they're already superstars, so they're like any superstars, whether it's musicians, actors, or whatever. They're living in a different kind of bubble. But the average boxer is way different than the average baseball player, let's say, or football player who are pros, because those people already are at a certain level. These fighters are guys that sometimes hold down another job, often, until they get to be a champion. They're fighters they're athletes who are really very generic kind of good guys who you would think would be your neighbors, and they're not taken with themselves, and I'm sure you'll agree with this. They're much more accessible to the media and much more willing to sit and talk to you than most other professional athletes. And yet they're uncommon, right, in that what they do is dangerous and it's difficult.
The last time I was with you, it was in Canastota, and you were being inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame. You've had some time to think about that now. How does it feel?
Oh, it was surreal at the time, obviously, and now it's funny. I look back on it, and as more time passes since it, I'm almost able to appreciate that weekend even more, and appreciate what it is. I think there's 7 broadcasters in the Hall of Fame, counting me, and so I feel like that's just a huge honor. And the Hall of Fame, Boxing's Hall of Fame, is very generous to those people who didn't get there by being in the ring. And anyone that saw me fight as an amateur would know I would never get there based on what I did in the ring back when the dinosaurs were around. I was an amateur boxer. So as time gets more, longer after it, I have even fonder memories of that whole weekend. But, I think I take it as a validation maybe of what you've done in the past, but it also energizes me for doing things in the future.
Speaking of things in the future, you know what happens when you do a book, right? You got to do another book.
A sequel,
yes. So are you working on that yet?
Godzilla versus Rodan 2, right?
Yeah.
Or Rocky 12. Mothra, yeah, that's right. Rocky 13, where Rocky beats up everybody in the nursing home.
But I would imagine when you're doing a book like that, 30 undeniable, you come up with 60 undeniable.
It is true. It's terrible. You and I were sitting here, and you brought up a story involving both of us that I should have put in the book, and I didn't, and it would have fitted perfectly. And I've had that happen.
Now he tells us during this broadcast.
Yeah, well, I think I had in the book, the greatest broadcaster in the history of the sport was James Smith. I'm pretty sure I put that in there.
Get out and buy this book. Order dozens of them. Dozens.
I'm pretty sure. Or no, maybe that's in the sequel. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's funny you're saying that, because after I got done with it, and then people have been coming up and telling me stories of other things, and even in doing it, I realized I could have put a lot more in it. So I'm hoping, first I'd like to have this one be successful, and it's doing very well right now. But I would write another one, because I do like the format, because it gives me a chance to kind of go in different directions, but we'll see.
Well, I'm sure everybody will enjoy it. I have not had the opportunity. I can't wait to sit down and enjoy it, because I know it's going to be great, because really one of the things, no matter where you and we did fights all over the country, and some of the cities were fine and some weren't so glamorous, but no matter what the event or who we were covering, it was always great being a broadcast partner of Al Bernstein.
We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun doing those fights, and hopefully we'll in the future. And you're right. There's something about the sport and television, and a lot of this book is about sports television, that I think breeds interesting things happening. And that, at the end of the book, I say, for the most part, the reason to write this book is somebody once said that great experiences and great people you meet are worth sharing with others. And that was the whole point of the book. I didn't have any agenda. I just wanted it to be entertaining and fun. And at the end of the day, I hope that's what it is.
Best of luck with the book. Great seeing you again.
Thank you. All right, Smitty, thanks.